When I was 2 years old, I moved to a town called Shelton, and there were not that many people who lived there, but basically everyone who did was on drugs. I remember I used to step out on the town and see people just hitting crack pipes right in front of the Walmart. Well, basically, the whole town was the Walmart. Like, we didn't have a mall or an activity center or anything like that, really. It was the Walmart, the McDonald's right across from the DSHS office, and the prison, which I'd only ever be at to visit my dad when he was in custody. So, people often would call the Walmart the heart of the city, even to this day. If I'm heading down there and want to meet up with someone, we usually just meet there because everything's there anyways. So when we moved to this neighborhood, we lived across from this couple named Jerry and Kara. I started developing cognitive memory right before I turned 4 years old, and some of my earliest memories are of their kids hanging out with my older siblings. I have 4 siblings, by the way, 3 brothers, 1 sister. They're all older than me. I also remember Jerry and Kara fighting a lot. As we later found out, Kara was cheating on Jerry with her drug dealer, and he kind of knew it already, but was staying because they had kids, but obviously it was an added tension, and eventually he started cheating on her too, so it just basically became an open relationship at that point. Now, I will say for the most part, I liked them enough. I mean, going over to their house wasn't my favorite thing in the world. I truly would have usually just rather been back at home watching basic cable, but I wasn't bitching about it. However, Kara was more than a little bit weird sometimes. I recall multiple occasions where she was playing Hot in Her by Nelly, and I would sing it while she did the female call response. You know what I mean? I'd be like, "It's getting hot in here, so take off all your clothes," and she'd be like, "I am getting so hot, I want to take my clothes off." She would encourage me to slap her ass during it as well, which I didn't realize was kind of weird until I got older. Outside of them, we really didn't talk to anyone else around us. I would occasionally talk to the cashier near the corner store by our house, but that was only when I was left unattended and I waddled up the street by myself. This would usually be not super often, but whenever my mom was at work and my siblings were at school, my dad usually was either gone or in jail or just strung out in bed or whatever the fuck his problem was that day. Usually, though, I would have at least one sibling home. They would just skip school sometimes, not even to watch me, but because either they didn't want to go or they didn't have transportation or didn't feel like walking, whatever the case may be. So anyways, yeah, I would go see this cashier. Sometimes he would give me free shit, so that was pretty lit. One day in early 2005, I was coloring a picture in my parents' room, and my dad's cousin named Joe barged in out of nowhere. Now, I was familiar with Joe already because we'd met a few times, but this time seemed very tense. Like, I could immediately tell the vibe was off the moment I looked at him. He looks at my parents who were laying in bed together, and he says to my dad, "You need to get the fuck away from her right now, or I'll tell her, Corey. I'll tell her what the fuck you've been doing, and I'll call the cops on your ass." Now, obviously, at the age of 5, I had no clue what he was upset about, but for some context, my dad had recently been having 3-ways with his cousin, as well as his cousin's wife, Heather. Look, I do not know the specific dynamics or the ins and outs of this love triangle. All I know is that it happened, and at this point, Joe and Heather wanted my dad to fully move in with them, but they were really upset that he came back to live with us. Now, before you fully judge my dad, I just want to say my father had a very tough childhood, okay? He told me his mom started giving him coke when he was in middle school. He smoked his first bowl when he was literally 4 years old. When he was 17, he was romantically involved with a 36-year-old woman he was directly related to, and he was brought up to think that was normal. So look, I'm not saying that excuses the behavior he exhibited, but it does partially explain it. To put it simply, he's not working with a full deck of cards in the game of life, or, well, he wasn't working with a full deck of cards, the bitch dead now, but I digress. The reason Joe was threatening to call the cops was because my parents at the time had a separation restraining order, so even though they were still married, they were legally ordered to be at least 500 feet away from each other at all times. They got this order made during a very rough patch. Well, the whole marriage was a rough patch, but I mean like the roughest of the rough patches. Like, I would walk out into the living room and they'd be beating the shit out of each other and my siblings would be trying to break it up. Eventually, my mom found out my dad was cheating on her, so she smashed the fuck out of his guitar, and I mean, that was before she even found out that he was cheating with his cousin and his cousin's wife of all people. So basically, they separated for a while, but at some point they decided to work it out. They were still fighting a lot, but at least it wasn't literally every night, so basically, Joe starts flipping furniture and screaming at us. He comes up to me and yanks the crown out of my hand, and he goes, "You think I'm fucking around?" And I'm like, "Girl, I don't know what the fuck you're doing right now. All I know is that you came into my house and I'm just sitting here trying to color in the clams on Princess Ariel's titties. It really sounds like a you problem." Once he started screaming at me and threatening me, my parents were like, "Okay, we need to get the fuck out of here." So they dragged me out to the front lawn and start telling all my siblings to go outside with us. My sister and my oldest brother were in the living room, so they came right out. Joe ran into the kitchen and pushed my 13-year-old brother to the floor and pulled a knife out on my then 8-year-old brother. So my 13-year-old brother gets up from the floor and starts attacking Joe, so my 8-year-old brother can escape. My parents don't know what else to do once we go outside because Heather was waiting outside with the car running already, so if we tried to go off anywhere, they would just follow us. So we ran over to Jerry and Kara's house to see if they could help. Jerry and Kara were usually helpful in times like this. For example, several times when my dad was really intoxicated, they'd overhear him abusing my mom or threatening the kids, so they would mediate for us because if we called the cops, our dad would get arrested. Unfortunately, they weren't home, so my brother ended up calling the police because Joe was literally chasing us with a knife and we needed help. While we waited for the cops, my dad and Joe started fighting in the front lawn, and my dad actually started beating the shit out of him, so much so that he just ran away and got into the van with Heather. I think at that point they both realized my dad wasn't coming with them and that this was just a pointless fight, so they started driving off. Jerry and Kara ended up arriving home before the cops got there, so in order to avoid our dad getting caught, they took him to a Mexican restaurant while the rest of us waited behind. After talking to the police, we met up with them, and my dad proposed to my mom that we get to know more of the neighbors in case of stuff like this happening again, while Jerry and Kara were not there to help. Kara recommended we get to know this lady down the street that she had recently become friendly with, who also had children of similar ages. Now, her name was Jennifer. Let me just iterate this right now. There are two Jennifers in this story, Cunt Jennifer and Bitch Jennifer. The Jennifer I'm currently talking about is Cunt Jennifer. Now, the reason I call her Cunt Jennifer is because she was extremely calculated and maniacal, like the closest a human being could possibly get to just a straight up Disney movie villain. This woman had no moral compass directing her at any point of her life during this time. Look, I don't know her today. I haven't spoken to her in about 18 years at this point, so she could be a completely different person now for all I know. But what I'm saying is all I have to go off of it is the woman that I knew. And the woman that I knew was a nasty, vindictive, spiteful vessel of dark energy and bad juju. I really did not fuck with her from the moment I met her. She gave me a foul read. I did not like going over to her house for any reason other than to see her daughter. Now, her daughter's name was May, and May was about the same age as me. May was my first childhood crush. I truly felt something for her for some reason. I do not know exactly how 5-year-old me came to that conclusion. I just did. We kind of made it official for a minute until she started cheating on me with this guy named Jimmy from her preschool, and I was absolutely livid, but that's seed for another day. Anyways, May was, however, also one of the few things that gave me an off vibe about Jennifer from the get-go because of one particular reason. Jennifer was white. And when I say white, I mean whiter than me. Her husband Zeke, who was a weird fuck we'll discuss more in a bit, whiter than a Cracker Barrel. May's 2 older siblings, whiter than Casper. Now, taking that into account, tell me why May came out looking like a damn Guatemalan. I'm talking brown eyes, long, thick, black hair, deep brown skin. The moment I looked at her and then looked at Zeke, I looked back at her again and I said, girl, I'm coming to you right now as a peer. I have watched more than enough episodes of Maury to know that ain't your daddy. You want to know what she said to me? She says, well, my mommy told me that since I was made in Hawaii, I'm brown. I'm like, that doesn't seem right to me personally, but you know what? I suppose I'll take your word for it. Because I clicked so well with May and our siblings also got along with each other, we started going to Jennifer's house more often over the course of a couple months, and once Jennifer started getting closer to my mom is when she started to get really weird. She became literally obsessed with my mom. At one point, she began proposing that my mom join a menage a trois with her and Zeke, and when my mom declined, she got extremely upset. However, the way Jennifer got upset wasn't typical. She didn't start yelling at my mom or even confront her. She decided she needed real material revenge. So what Jennifer did was she decided to befriend my 11-year-old sister and get in her ear about how bad our parents really were and how she would be so much happier living with Jennifer. She promised to buy her a new cell phone, new clothes, whatnot, the whole shebang. Now, I'm gonna say this right now, I'm fully on my sister's side in this situation. There was a lot of debate in my family following what happened next for years to come. It took my dad years on end to forgive her for it, if he ever even fully actually did before he died. But in my opinion, my sister only did what she did in this situation because anyone else would have done it too. Because for all intents and purposes, we should not have been living in the conditions we were living in. I personally can think of multiple occasions in retrospect where I genuinely don't understand how CPS wasn't already involved before this. Like I said before, when I was 5 years old, I would sometimes go to the corner store by myself, and one time I even almost got hit by a car while I was crossing the street. There was a night where I fell asleep on the hammock in the front lawn, and when I woke up to morning daylight, I was still there. Nobody had come to check on me. on me the whole night. My mom was always at work and my dad was always nodding off on heroin under his comforter. I basically was being raised by a television, and at that age, I was literally watching Family Guy and South Park by myself. I loved my parents, and in particular, my mother dearly, but quite plainly, we as kids needed to be removed from that home for the betterment of all of us, them included. And to this day, I'm in some capacity grateful we did get taken away, because it's really what gave my mother the strength to leave my father and get clean so she could eventually get me and my brother back. If she had stayed with that man, the worst case scenario would be that he ended up killing her, and the only way out would be that she ended up killing him or he overdosed. Those were the options. It was not a good environment for any of us. Did it suck being removed from pretty much my entire immediate family for 5 years of my childhood? Of course it did. Did it suck getting extremely physically and emotionally abused by my foster parents? We'll get to that. Of course it did. But it was entirely necessary for something to be done about what was happening. My sister, of course, started just saying to the courts whatever Jennifer told her to say in order to get us out of where we were living. Once my parents caught on to what Jennifer was doing, however, they decided they were going to make a break for it and move us all back to California. That's where they lived before I was born. Coincidentally, on the same day we were supposed to leave, however, my dad got arrested again. So in order to hide from the cops, my mom cleared out our house, took everything with us to her friend's place to stay until my dad was able to get released in a few days. But this made the situation even worse, because before the cops came to investigate the premises, Jennifer realized we had fleed. So she broke into our house and planted a bunch of drugs and cat shit all over the place that wasn't there before to make it look abhorrently incriminating. And since we weren't at the house, it just stayed like that until the police showed up to investigate. Upon seeing how absolutely wrecked the house was, CPS immediately put out a custody order for all 5 of us to be taken into foster care indefinitely, and it was not hard for them to track us down. I vividly remember the night before we got taken away, I was asleep in my mom's friend's laundry room, and I had an extremely lifelike dream where I was at a diner with cunt Jennifer, and she turned green and poisoned my food, and I was so vivid about it. I woke up in the middle of the night, and it took me a couple minutes to readjust to reality. I think that was the first time I ever had a dream like that. I then fell back asleep and pretty much had the exact same dream again. This time when I woke up, all I heard outside the room was an inexplicable amount of commotion to be commencing at 8 in the fucking morning. Before I could even sit up, a police officer came into the room and told me to get up and follow him. Mind you, I had no idea what was going on. I, in the moment, thought I was just getting arrested. I mean, I'd seen my dad get arrested enough times that I thought it was just a thing that happened from time to people. In fact, for a second, I even got kind of excited because I thought maybe he was taking me to jail so I could see my dad. But once I stepped outside, I knew something completely different was happening because my mom was crying. And when I say crying, I mean bawling. I had never seen my mother cry like that before, even when my dad was beating her. It was painful to bear witness. I just heard her saying to me, "Mommy loves you so much, Nino, I'm so sorry." And I was like, oh wait. This is some real shit. This police officer takes me on his little go-kart and drives me down the street to where I'm gonna be living now. Now here's where it gets tricky. I got put into a different house than my 3 oldest siblings because they went to live with cunt Jennifer, and since she already had 3 kids of her own, she wasn't permitted to take in any more kids. So I, as well as my youngest older brother, went to live with the lady next door to cunt Jennifer, who was also named Jennifer. Now here is where we meet bitch Jennifer. Now I had not met bitch Jennifer a day in my life before this, but apparently my brother was already kind of tight with her and her 2 biological kids, and bitch Jennifer was also very good friends with cunt Jennifer, and actually aided in getting the courts to take us away from our parents. So I would sometimes overhear them talking shit about how awful and abusive my dad and mom were, even though these 2 bitches were way more abusive behind closed doors. But these 2 women were essentially the physical embodiment of, like, the 2 dumb bitches looking at each other saying exactly me. You know what I'm talking about? Bitch Jennifer was evil as well, but she was evil in a completely different way to cunt Jennifer. Because this Jennifer, as well as her husband and family, were extremely evangelical. They come from the South. They like monster trucks and Coors Light and all that shit. They were extremely homophobic as well. So immediately they took a disliking to me once they realized I was more effeminate than most boys my age, and even though they abused my brother just as much, if not more than they did me, they always kind of intrinsically had more respect for him as a person, you know what I mean? Now, if I was gonna break down everything wrong with bitch Jennifer and all of what she did to me over the course of the 2 years I lived with her, I would have to make a whole separate video, but just know for now, she was not nice to me in really any fathomable capacity. Really just did not like my ass. Anyways, even though we were right next door to them, I was rarely allowed to ever see my older siblings. Bitch Jennifer would intentionally keep me away from them because she thought they were bad influences. Just a few months later, my siblings ended up getting removed from cunt Jennifer's house, and she also lost custody of her own biological kids because once my siblings moved in, she started abusing them really bad, and she also abused her own kids as well. That's another thing Bitch Jennifer was different about than cunt Jennifer, in that she only abused my brother and I. She didn't treat her biological kids that bad, really. Well, at the least, sometimes maybe, but it was basically just exposed that cunt Jennifer was not only doing every drug under the sun, more so even than my father was, she was just an absolutely violent and ruthless caretaker. Her husband Zeke was also a huge fucking creep. He was apparently sending provocative photos, including him wearing his daughter's clothes to teenage girls. He was also doing a shit ton of drugs, and he was also banging other men on the low, which bitch Jennifer was extremely disturbed about, to the point she was ranting and raving about it while pacing through the house. She was more upset about the fact that he was fucking other men than she was about the fact he was caught texting underage girls. That just goes to show you the kind of person I was dealing with here, by the way. Cunt Jennifer's biological kids got placed into random foster homes. I never really saw them again, while my siblings went to live with our grandparents, who were reluctant to take in any of us at the time, but once this all fucking happened, they kind of got to the point where they were like, we don't really have a choice. My brother and I still remained at bitch Jennifer's house, however, because by outsider knowledge, she wasn't doing anything wrong. Now, you may be wondering what ended up happening to cunt Jennifer and Zeke, or whether or not they got their kids back. Well, they actually ended up getting a divorce after their children were taken away, much like my parents. For some reason, Zeke did end up regaining custody of May after several years of her being in foster care, but his oldest kids were already old enough to have moved out by themselves by the time that happened. Jennifer was unable to battle for custody at all, actually, because in 2009 she was sentenced to 7 years in prison for manslaughter. Listen, when I say she got charged with manslaughter, I don't mean regular manslaughter. I mean she straight up basically put a hit out on someone. Literally, this guy, mind you, in his early 20s, when she was like in her 40s, he borrowed, I kid you not, $45 from her and did not pay her back in time. So she got so mad about this, she paid another guy an undisclosed amount of money to go beat this kid up with a wooden bat and tell him to give her money back. However, this guy she sent to attack him ended up actually going way too hard and accidentally killing him. So he went to prison for murder, and she caught her 7-year little sentence by extension. All that over $45. That's even more ridiculous than calling CPS because someone doesn't want to do a three-way with you. I, to this day, do not understand why that woman's priorities were what they were, and hopefully I'll never have to speak to her again and find out, but something deep within her just provokes her to be the craziest, nastiest bitch she could possibly be. But anyways, my mom ended up getting custody of my brother and I back in 2010. Much like in Zeke's case, our older siblings had gotten old enough to the point that there was no reason for them to come live with us, but nonetheless, I still commend my mom for being able to do that. As for Joe and Heather, they also ended up getting a divorce because my dad ended up dating and living with Heather, and she just left Joe for him. I have some stories about Heather as well, and how much she tried to make my life a living hell, but once again, that would just have to be its own video. They were together on and off until he died in 2018, my dad, that is, and she was cheating on him a lot. It was a bad relationship. Jerry and Cara, unlike the savory fate of their neighbors, were actually able to maintain custody of their children, and eventually they even got sober. They even moved into a bigger house and were trying to make things work, but at one point they did end up getting a divorce. I mean, it was just inevitable considering all the cheating they'd both done to each other. There was just really no trust left there. I think what we can all take away from this story is truly that even though things may not unfold the ways in which you plan, you really got to remember that these things do happen for a reason. As much as the reasoning for my parents losing custody of their kids was technically founded on lies, there was an underlying truth to the lies that were crafted, and what happened ended up likely putting us all in a better situation. But with that, I think we can also acknowledge that something else to take away here is that simply minding your own business and not calling the kettle black when you yourself are the pot is a very wise decision most of the time. For example, if cunt Jennifer had simply accepted that my mom didn't want to have a three-way with her in the first place and just moved on with her life, she wouldn't have put herself in the predicament where she was exposed for the type of mother she was, and she probably wouldn't have gotten her kids taken away either, at least for a while. And if she hadn't gotten her kids taken away, she probably wouldn't have gotten the divorce and been so broke that she was out here killing people over $45 fucking dollars. $45, I can't get over that. So let her be an example. Study the moves she made and where she went wrong, because she may have had a supervillain scheme mapped out, but what she forgot is that what you know you shouldn't be keeping in the dark will always come to light. Doing good things with bad reasoning is coming from the same place of the heart as just straight up doing bad deeds for the sake of doing bad shit, and it still very much puts you in the wrong. So yeah, that's the story. Bye.